Yep, that's us.
Great. So, nice to see you, Harvey.
Yes, you too.
Perhaps I'll do a little introduction. Um, Harvey is a regenerative farmer. He sells his produce on your website. You've gone very blurry there, actually, Harvey.
Right. This is in my
Yeah.
fake library. This is not my library.
Well, there
It's
you
a
go. That's
green
better.
screen.
Yeah. Maybe just move a bit.
Yeah.
Um, it's called Hawthorne Farm. Is that right?
Haythorn. Haythorn cattle.
Haythorne.
Yeah, that's us.
Haythorncattle.com.
Co.uk.
Um, .co.uk, sorry. And I was, well, I'm interested in chatting to you because we've had the opportunity to work a little bit together on a project, which was an architectural bid. Um, and for a long time now, I've been developing my interests in how our housing might change, the design of our houses might change um, when combined with food production. Um, so that has in the past manifested itself with having a consultation with some forest garden specialists looking into agroforestry. And for those people who watch my channel will know that recently I have become a nutrition coach for the carnivore way of living, which is predominantly eating meat. So that opened my eyes up to the prospects of what if we were to work more closely, if we were to design our houses more closely with farmers like yourself who have free roaming cattle. Um, and if we were to combine working closely with you and the local communities where you could produce food for them, perhaps that would unlock some land that perhaps wasn't thought viable before for housing or for free roaming cattle. And how might our houses change? How that might the design of our houses change to so that they sit harmoniously in this new, arguably new setting. So we had a chat about it, and um, I guess I'd like to kind of just ask you a little bit. So if you can just explain what you do, and I've got a few questions, and we can get a bit of a conversation around the topic.
Yep. Yep. Perfect. Yeah. So as Adam said, my name's Harvey, and I am a beef farmer. So I keep cattle for beef, and really, I've only been running this business for about just coming up 2 years now. In the way that I am, which is what I do is or I rent land, which is pasture land, so it's grass, and that's around my local area here in central England. And I keep cattle. I'll keep cattle on different parcels of land. I try and use a technique called rotational grazing, which helps me to manage the cattle in a healthy manner, and it keeps the land healthy and the grass healthy. And frankly, it just makes it easier and more profitable as well to run my farm that way. So I keep my cattle like that. I breed some, and then I keep some for growing as well. And we more recently started selling some of our own beef to the public, which really has been the jump into the public eye has been fascinating. Opening that conversation with people, with yourself, with people who do want to speak to a farmer, and that demand is there. I think people are hungry to actually connect with their food. But the model for so long, and the model that I did for so long, was just straight to sort of through the supermarkets and through the big guns. Yeah, it's been really nice connecting connecting the public back to farming and shortening that supply chain. Yeah, we're just looking to grow really as we move into year three. We're taking on a little bit more land, keeping some more cattle, and yeah, going from there. That's where we're at the minute.
So initially, you said you were going to supermarkets, or you were selling your produce at supermarkets.
Yeah.
So how long did you do that for in your first 3 years?
Well, really, that's more what I grew up with. So I grew up on a farm. My parents were farmers, same industry, so beef cattle, and that's for as long as I knew that's the way it's done, really, and it still is. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to say there is. It's just that if we can make an effort to shorten that supply chain, I think that's a win-win scenario for everyone. It is good for me as a farmer. I can retain more of the value. I can connect with my customers, do more marketing. So I like it, and hopefully the public can benefit from it too. But yeah, so in terms of the commercial side of it, that's really what I grew up with, and then I've been selling beef for almost 2 years privately.
So just for the benefit of people, because we haven't mentioned that you do a YouTube
Mm,
uh, video podcast where every now and again you'll be on your farm and you'll be just showing the day-to-day kind of running of the farm. There was one particular one where you mentioned about other farmers who had, or there was a drought and you had a particular area of land that you let become waterlogged so that you could kind of maintain the grass there. So, I mean, I really like your YouTube channel because it just gives that very day-to-day kind of what does it take to do what you do. And it's on a small scale. And I really love the idea of you selling to local communities. I haven't bought any of your meat yet. I must do that.
yeah, I'll ship some up to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Um, so, yeah, I'd like to kind of get into a few questions, perhaps, just so that we can bounce some ideas off each other about how your regenerative approach on a small scale might kind of coexist with small community housing schemes or something like that. So perhaps can you just tell us a little bit about, how much land you have? I think you've got more than one or two pockets of land distributed. And then how many cows you've got, what kind of cows they are. Can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yep, certainly. Yeah, you're correct that I'm sort of spread out over several different farms. So it's all farms I rent, so I don't own anything myself. And so currently I'm on about 4 different properties, all local to where I live. So probably a 10-mile radius. And I'm keeping cattle at each one of these properties. So in total, we're going to be coming into the next year. It's going to total around 300 acres of basically permanent pasture. So it's pasture. It's not being planted as that. That's what it's always been, or it has been for a while. And there are different landscapes. Like I show on the YouTube, there's sort of flood meadows. There's rocky parts. It's spread out. There's weird, wacky shapes of fields. So it can be it can be a challenge, sort of managing each piece. But each piece of land requires its own type of management. Overall, this year I've kept about 120 cows. That's a mix of different ages and different classes of cattle. So I keep a small breeding herd. So I keep the cows, I get them in calf, and they have their babies, and I try and grow them through. That's a really long process, so it can take 2 to 3 years for a calf to be from being born to the point where it's able to harvest or go to the butchers. So I'm trying to grow that. That's only about sort of a dozen heads, about 12, 13 head of cows. And then the majority side of my business is keeping store cattle, what's called store cattle, which is adult growing cattle that need to be, they're not ready to get butchered yet. They need to be grown for another sort of year or so. And I keep them. I own some of them, but then I also keep some for another farmer. So I keep some for another person. I get paid to keep them and grow them. So with all those cattle, like I said, I split them up in whatever way I see fit in terms of boys and girls, age classes, weights, even breeds, or what cattle I think might suit a certain piece of land. That also comes into it. And yeah, I manage each group like that. The breeds, the cattle I breed myself, I obviously have control of the genetics and the breeds. So I have a breed called Red Poll, which come from East Anglia, Suffolk, Norfolk, and I keep beef Shorthorn as well, which is again an English native breed. And then the ones I take from other people can be anything, mostly British breeds because they do well in our climate and our grass that we grow, but it can be anything. Yeah, so that's the split.
And I was going to ask you because I've been to the NEP estate, and I talk about
Yes.
that in my podcast with Dave Mack on No Carb Life. And one of my questions was, what made you choose the beef shorthorn or the red poll over the longhorn cattle?
Yes, yeah, I'm aware. I haven't visited yet, but they keep a longhorn herd. Or I say keep. Obviously, their whole idea is to go natural and let things roam freely.
So how does that, just on that point then, what's the difference there? I mean, yours seem to be, from what I've seen from your YouTube, they seem to be free roaming, and as if they do look after themselves. Is it as much a hands-off approach as the NEP project?
No, it's not really. I guess I'm somewhere in the middle of the spectrum from being sort of full confinement farming where animals are in a shed, in a barn. You need to bring the food to them. You have to take the manure away, all of that. Um, from what I understand with NEP is they were trying to do, it's more of an experiment than anything, where they wanted to see what happened to the landscape if they just took human control completely out of the equation. And they kept farm animals in there, so some cattle and some other species, I think. And other than sort of necessary tasks like maybe recording what's born and sort of controlling the breeding, maybe I think otherwise they were pretty much hands off completely. So what I do is a pasture based system, so everything's out grazing outdoors almost all of the year, eating almost exclusively grass all year. So it's very natural in that sense. However, it's very tightly controlled in terms of my management. So where I put them, how I move the cattle through a farm and through the fields is very tightly controlled, and I have to keep a tight control on that in terms of my management. Otherwise, the system would sort of fall apart. Especially with me being spread out over several different properties that aren't continuous. So just to give people listening an idea of scale, the NEP project in England is something like 3,000 acres or something like that. It could be bigger. And that's in one block. So wildlife has a chance to roam extremely freely over a really vast landscape. If I'm managing about 300 acres, so 1/10 of that, in 4 or 5 blocks, these blocks are only averaging 60, 70 acres or something like that. It's a big piece of land, but you can't keep enough animals on that and just let them roam freely. You'll actually see a decrease in the animal health and a decrease in the health of the landscape. So ironically, it requires my management to keep the health of everything going.
Great. And we chatted before, you mentioned about how often you have to move them, how often you have to tend to them, and what kind of work you have to do. I know you show that on your video, but if you could explain a little bit about that,
Yeah, definitely.
that'd be good.
Essentially, I think that livestock, it's usually wise to check farm animals daily on average. So that's just a case of making sure they're where they need to be and keeping an eye on your animal's health if you own animals. In terms of my management with the grazing, what I'm trying to do is rotationally graze them through a certain farm, and usually that'll involve me physically moving where they are using my fencing somewhere between every day to every week. So at the minute I'm moving moving a herd every day, but it can, depending on the time of year and the availability of the forage and whatnot, that can go out to sort of once every 6 or 7 days. So yeah, the way I do that is I divide up these farms with fencing, and then I can have several different fields essentially to rotate them through. So yeah, on a day-to-day basis, that's really the main task, and that's, as I keep saying, that's the key thing for me managing the animal health as well. Keeping fresh grass going into a cow is really important. It's really you're going to be able to lower the parasite burden and increase the nutrition they're getting. So a lot of my work is kind of done by rotating animals, which is a nice place to be. Every now and again, there's sort of a work day as such that is a lot more hands on. So that could be something where I need to be working with a vet for disease testing or pregnancy testing with cows, or any treatments if they need any treatments. That usually there's no routine treatments I need to do at all, but something like that then would require me to get animals into some sort of handling system and work with them. So that can be more labor intensive. But on a good day, checking a large group of animals might just take 15-20 minutes, and then you're done.
And so, because your land is quite split between the two, between the three sites, is it? Um, you mentioned off camera that you had to drive. You were driving between the sites, perhaps sometimes having to take cows from one site to another. But that now you kind of don't do that anymore. You're leaving particular cows where they are, but you've just kind of maintained a particular type, a particular number. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. It's been a sort of economic equation, really. Usually what's best for my finances is best for the land and the animals as well, which is a cool business to be in. It's one of the only businesses where being good to nature is also good for your bank. So yeah, with the moving of the animals, I trialed this year trying to have less separate groups of animals, trying to put them into one or two groups, and then physically moving them around farms with basically a trailer, so a tractor and a trailer, or a truck and a trailer. So naturally, much more labor intensive and burning more fuel as well, and putting more hours on machines. And yeah, I just found that was a bit too much, really, too labor intensive, and because it was a difficult procedure, it actually meant I delayed it and I put it off, and I didn't do it as frequently or as strictly as I should have been. So I've sort of moved more to the model of putting the correct amount of animals on one piece of land, leaving them there, and just managing them in place, so that all I need to do is visit or have somebody visit them, move them, check on them, and leave them. Pulling a heavy trailer load of 10 tons of animals is quite an intensive thing, and takes a lot of fuel. And yeah, it's best to let them. They've got four legs, so you try and make them walk as much as you can.
And one of the things at NEP that they do is they have different types of animals on the same land, and they talk a lot about how they are beneficial to each other. So, for example, the wild ponies eat the very long grass. That lets the cows get access to the shorter grass, which is the kind that they want to eat. Um, is that something you ever considered, having other animals on the land with the cows that you've got, or is? I mean, I know you're a new business, so perhaps you're still kind of finding your way still a little bit. I don't know. Although you,
Yeah, I've thought of it. Yeah, it's a fascinating ecological equation. So with managing land, we're always got an eye on what nature wants and what nature would naturally do. And arguably, keeping cattle on a one farm for most of the year, one patch of land, is probably not actually a natural thing to do. But very little about farming is actually natural. Nature wouldn't want us to be monocropping a field of wheat or something. That's probably the far end of the spectrum. And thankfully, Livestock grazing is a much more natural process. But with the different species, it's almost as if, for me, I can use other processes to mimic that process, or that relationship in nature. Yeah, nature naturally is going to have different species and different grazing processes going on, with probably so a ruminant animal like a cow or sheep, and then like a hind gut fermenter like a horse. Often with grassland, that's probably the ideal setup. Like you alluded to, it's the different nutritional requirements of the animals mean they eat different things, meaning that the land sort of grows in the way that's natural for it. So yes, if I am keeping cattle, it's sort of depriving the land of something that it wants, which is a different species of animal to graze. The way I can get around with that is usually some sort of mechanical process. So some sort of mowing is actually going to reset all species of grass back to the same baseline. Now, again, if I could avoid mowing and use an animal to harvest grass, that would be excellent, because an animal's a value producing asset for me, and jumping on a tractor and burning diesel is spending money. So I can use things like mowing and topping to keep different species of grass under control. I can also influence the way I manage cattle, the ruminant animal, to have that same effect. So this is quite. I haven't necessarily experimented with this that much. However, if you supplement a cow with some additional protein, you can increase the density at which you graze, which makes them less selective with their diet. So they eat even the undesirable forage species, and so you're essentially making a cow do the job of a cow and a horse. So that's something that I have seen farmers do and have great success with. Obviously, it's all a balance, because then that is going to need some additional infrastructure, more fencing, and more labour. But yeah, that's how I approach that. So I'd be open to more species, but it'd be a way up for me as to the cost of integrating those species, the hassle, the additional labour or equipment needed.
Okay. Um, did you mention the kind of the shape of the land that you've got? Because I was thinking about, how much of a benefit it would be if all your pockets of land. Obviously, it would be a benefit if they linked up physically, so that you could go from one to the other. And so I'm just wondering about the shape of the land. Each pocket of land that you have got, is it? What are the kind of restrictions in terms? Because I know you fence part of your fields off, and you create. I've seen on your YouTube channel you create kind of corridors to drive them from one area to another. Um, so, can you kind of talk me through how did you arrive at getting those particular parcels of land? Were they in your family already? And have you looked at, is it something that's on your mind to buy other pockets? Is the shape of the land important?
Yeah. Yeah, let me touch on the shape first, and then I'll come back to the other question. So, yeah, really, it's all dictated by primarily natural borders. So I've got a lot of land that borders a river or some sort of natural feature, which becomes an obvious border for that land. And then a step up from that, I suppose, you have borders that have been drawn over the years between different owners of land, or probably historically it was different estates and things like that. So so that's what you got. Now, in this country, we're of course very lucky to have a lot of hedgerows. That's part of our scenery and part of our farming history and culture. So usually the farms where I'm at, it's sort of divided up by hedgerows and trees. So we're lucky to have a good amount of trees, which are great for the soil itself, and good for having livestock as well in terms of shade and shelter. So it's often, yeah, shape wise, it can be anything. I mean, usually farms have been sort of, over the years, they've been crafted into shapes that are efficient for machinery, basically.
Yeah,
To
that's
start out,
exactly
that
it.
would have been horses, I guess, and stuff like that. But in more recent years, I mean, sort of post war in the last century, it was people were ripping out hedgerows left, right, and centre to try and get more square fields. Because as you can picture, a square is really efficient in terms of not driving excess miles in a tractor. So yeah, most farmland is sort of divided. That's why when if you take a flight and you look out of the plane window, you can see this patchwork of land. Everything's been made into quite uniform blocks and quite square blocks. The more rougher areas I'm on, like flood meadows and things that follow rivers, obviously those shapes can be just anything. The shape that it can follow the line of the river, so they can be a bit more awkward. But yeah, and then like I said, from that, so as you've seen, I can manually then go in with fencing and things to divide up land to my advantage. And what that is basically to create a flow of rotation for the animals around a farm. And usually it's dictated where I've got water. So where I've got water to water the animals, because cows drink so much water, you need constant access. So that can be the limiting factor for the shape of fields as well. It's where there's water. So if there's mains water or a river or whatever. Your second question was with acquiring land and things like that. So I work with several different landowners where I'm essentially the tenant, and it's well, for me it's been a sort of journey. I started with one property that I rented. There was a farmer looking for someone new to rent their land, and it was grassland, and they specifically wanted someone to keep animals. So I fit the bill. And since then, like I said, in the last 2 years, I've tacked on a couple of new places, which has just been some of it's been me sort of cold calling people. I've knocked on doors, but we're definitely in a relationship based business, community based business in farming where there's not many of us, so everybody knows everybody. So as I've got going, it's definitely helped me to get a name for myself, get a reputation, and just let people know what I'm doing. And from that, I've had a couple of opportunities where people are interested in me coming and managing their land or their farm. So yeah, so since I got started, I'd say it's got easier now to acquire land. Um, yeah, does that answer it?
Yeah, I think so. Um, so I'm wondering whether you could comment on, because my interest as an architect, and I've forgotten now how much we talked about it at the start of this video, but the idea that communities, new housing, and farmers like yourself can kind of come together to perhaps unlock some portions of land that perhaps weren't thought of before as grazing or as housing. And the idea that free roaming cattle would have more of a run, more of a wilderness to explore, and that our housing was right at the heart of that. So, not necessarily going back to an old way of living, but using the best of our 21st century design, but kind of re-establishing a new relationship with nature is something that really interests me. So from what I understand, there aren't any buildings on the land that you've got where you keep your cows. How far are they away from the village, the local village, or what access do people have do people have right of access through your land currently? And what impact might it have, do you think, if cows and houses were to be much closer sited?
Yeah, I'll explain what I'm dealing with at the minute, and then I'll sort of expand if I have any ideas on what the future might be. So yes, I do have several pieces of land where there's public rights of way, so footpaths or bridleways. And I think that's one of the strengths of our country is we do have really good access for the public to the countryside. I'm all in favour of that. It can create a challenge on farmland with managing livestock, especially. You of course want to make it safe for the public to walk across land and be in nature. You also want to make it safe and not stressful for livestock to be around more people than they probably naturally would. So that's another factor. And I think, yeah, in terms of proximity, yeah, I'm in a densely populated part of the country actually down here in sort of East Midlands of England. It's not quite like the hills of Wales or Scotland. I'm no more than I'm on the edge of a city, and really I'm trying to think anywhere I have cows, they're probably no more than 5-minute drive or less from a village. So there's benefits to that. There's probably cons to that as well. But I think if we're clever as an industry, we could make it a benefit. And with your ideas regarding design and architecture, I think there is scope for integration.
I'm
Now,
thinking, years ago, people would live with their animals inside, in some circumstances,
yeah,
inside their houses. So I'm thinking about the Crannogs in Scotland.
I haven't heard of
Uh,
them.
so they're a straw thatched roof
Yeah,
that were sited over the lochs in Scotland. Apparently, there were thousands of them at the time. There's a great one on Loch Tay that unfortunately burned down. I'm not sure whether they've rebuilt it, but I visited it once before it burned, and it's a great little visitor centre. And they would have what they describe as you would cross the bridge to the house, which was sited over the loch, and the cows would be herded in, and then you would sleep above the cows, on a kind of mezzanine level. And obviously that was for a couple of reasons. Obviously for security, so that they knew their livestock were secure, and then also just getting the benefit of the warmth that the cows would give off would help them keep warm in the cold
yeah. I
winters.
have seen. I think it's a big part of American history and culture is those sort of, I'm sure everyone can picture one, is that sort of pointy shaped barn, like a red barn on a farmyard, where people would live above their cattle. I think also in sort of Northern Europe and Scandinavia, that was a big part of their culture. Like you said, keeping warm above livestock was part of it. Yeah, I
Yeah, I
don't know in
mean,
this.
I don't know if I'm sure lots of people would be horrified by that idea, but the lots of indigenous tribes still live very closely with their animals.
Yeah,
And I've always felt that, we have become so detached from our wildlife in many of our cities around Britain now. And, at a cost to our own mental health. And there's something kind of romantic about the idea of letting nature back into our cities somehow and our towns and just reconnecting. And having our wild animals roam freely. And I think with the benefits of technology now, I don't know how do you tag your animals? I mean, it's all digital. Could be digital now.
no, it's recorded digitally, but it's a physical tag that the cows have in their ear, which identifies them. Yeah. What are you thinking in regard to that?
Yeah, I guess I'm just openly exploring the idea of so Charlie. Oh, hold on, I'm going to have to cut that. There's someone at the door.
Oh, no problem.
Just 2 seconds.
Yeah, no worries.
Back again. Sorry about that. Where were we? Talking about tagging, weren't we? Yeah. So I know that Charlie and Isabel at the NEP estate have said in their documentary film Wilding. Charlie mentions his vision of wildlife corridors, that run all the way up Britain from north to south, where free roaming animals could be free to roam, and it made me wonder about whether the models that are around right now of keeping cattle on private portions of land, whether that's open to kind of change somehow. For example, I mean, how far could if the land linked up somehow, if your pockets of land linked up, you allowed others' lands to link up to yours, and other farmers who owned cows had some agreement with you, and their cows could roam as far as they wanted to, essentially, across lots of different pockets of land from all the way up and down Britain. You could probably keep a track of them digitally, so you could see them on a map. You could say, oh no, they're in Leeds or wherever it is.
What's wrong with Leeds?
Yeah, no, nothing at all. But it might be a bit far from you if
Yes.
if you wanted to go and check on them. But I imagine this kind of Uber kind of network of free roaming cows, owned by different people, roaming the whole of Britain as they wished, and you being able to track where they were, and perhaps a kind of larger scale model of the business, that you do essentially.
Yeah.
Do
I
you know
think
where I'm
that,
going with that? And
yeah, I
and
do.
with that comes kind of taking away the restrictions that you've currently got for more of an open, free roaming system across Britain.
Yeah, I think you have to. The way I look at it in my head is that you have to sort of define what the goal is. Now, the things we've spoken about are a few things of trying to integrate people back into their food, their farming, and just nature in terms of their health. That's one goal, which I think is completely true and completely admirable. But then you look at somewhere like the NEP project, and from what I understand, they really were just, like I said, sort of experimenting and a bit like, oh, what do we do if we just let this go? Let this roam. And yeah, they had that scale to be able to do that. Now they had that scale like privately owned on the estate, which is excellent, and that probably made it easy for them because they didn't need collaboration with other farmers and other people. But with the model that we're exploring, I think that depending on the goal, it would look different. If we're exclusively talking about food production and sort of efficient ways of making food, then it looks one way and it probably looks more intensive. If it's exclusively talking about sort of regeneration and trying to, say, sequester carbon, that kind of goal, then it probably looks another way, but still similar to farming, but just based on more regenerative models. And if you're just doing it for the sake of an experiment to see what happens if you let animals roam freely, then that's another thing. But the trouble is, I don't think you can do one without the other. And I think the most efficient way would be to try and combine everything. I think we can produce food, but do it more regeneratively. I think we can run regeneratively with incorporating more people, but I don't think we can go all one way and just sort of. I don't think we can scale the NEP project out to the full country. And I equally don't think we can just scale the food production intensification to the full country also. There's a balance to be had.
Yeah. Okay. And currently, you the reach that you've got for your business in terms of where do you sell in Britain? Is that all of mainland Britain, or is it more localized?
It is all of Britain, really, in that I offer shipping, so I can ship and have shipped my beef to people around the country. But really, predominantly, it is local. I offer that option just in case people can't make it to me to collect their food, really. But my aim primarily is to serve my local community. And I think it's a bit of a paradox because half of me is like, yeah, I want to just scale the business to infinity and ship beef globally or something. But I actually don't think that's the system I advocate for, and I'd rather serve local people. And I think really that's what we should replicate over the country and over the industry is a system where farms serve their local community. I think that really that's the sustainable way of going forward.
And you mentioned, I don't think you mentioned it while we were recording off camera, perhaps, that there's going to come a limit where you can only do so much, and you might have to employ someone to help you because your pockets of land are split. What kind of skills? So I'm just thinking about what would it take. What kind of things do you have to do on a day-to-day level? I mean, so that, because I'm thinking if we could somehow, if there was an opportunity to explore this model of producing food for a community with a housing design that kind of breaks some normal conventions, could the community kind of take part in that maintenance, in that looking after the cattle, do you think?
Yes, I think
Along
that
with
would
your
be,
with your help.
yeah, yeah, with guided management and setup. That's essentially on a small scale. What I'm looking at in my business is that I know the system I need to run, but sometimes labour can be my bottleneck in terms of managing land and animals. So I'm looking at using different people, friends, employees to help do that with inside the managed system, which I think might apply to what you're talking about. I think it might be the key really to what we're talking about is that labor or that sort of responsibility aspect, because that when people are bought in with something, you know what it's like. You take care of your own home when it's yours. You take care of your own garden when it's yours. So if people were bought into animals or just farming as a whole, then you get that stewardship and that love and care for it. And yeah, it might sort of tick some boxes when it comes to proximity of people to animals. Um, it might be the missing link.
Cool. Well, I think I've used all my questions up. This I think this initial, because this is our first time recording together, is something that we've talked about before, and this is our first stab at trying to just start talking about this idea of housing communities and working alongside people like yourself who are doing regenerative farming on a relatively small scale. And so perhaps after I've had some time to reflect, or you've had some time to reflect, we might come up with some other ideas of what we could talk about. But I would encourage, and apologies to the viewers, if once we've posted this, with the quality of your video, which is very pixelated on my
Oh, is it?
screen.
I think it
Every
gets
now and again,
better
you come
after.
into focus.
I'm fading out. Yeah,
I don't know if that's how it's going to happen, how it's going to look, the final cut, but we'll
I
find
think it
out.
might be better once it's saved.
Yeah, good. So I would, hopefully, if anyone watches this, if please comment, and with any comments you might have, things that we perhaps could discuss a little bit more around this topic. It's something that I'd like to talk about more. I think we're facing some quite big problems at the moment with, we need to build thousands and thousands of houses, and there's a big shortage. And I'm really keen to make sure we build the right kind of houses. And I'm also really keen to make sure that we re-establish this balance between us and nature. We just reconnect, because at the moment it feels like we're designing our cities are growing and growing, and our towns are growing at the exclusion of nature. And I think the answer is to work more closely with people like yourself. So thanks very much for coming on, and please carry on doing what you're doing. And I'd
Yeah.
encourage everyone to check your YouTube channel out, which I'll link at the bottom of in the show notes.
Yep, certainly. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, I think just to touch on what you said at the end there, I think you're right. There's this sort of token gesture of planting a little bit of grass in the housing estate, whatever, for nature. But you're the first person I've heard really speaking about this with intent and with creativity and intent to make a change in the future. So credit to you, and thanks for having me on. And yeah, we'll definitely have to expand this conversation in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Harvey.
Thank you. Take care.